think we're going to go ahead and get started. Everybody is here, I'm hoping, in the right place for our GROW Nebraska Third Thursday training featuring Laura from U.S. Bank Corporate Security. And we are so thankful this month. Our wonderful sponsor, U.S. Bank, we have a representative, Jay Rose, here to tell us a little bit about what they do. Jay?
Sure, thanks, Heidi. Well, U.S. Bank is excited to be a part of this call. This is a very pertinent topic to small businesses, and it always amazes me the things that go on. So I'm actually kind of looking forward to hearing the call as well. But again, my name is Jay Rose. I'm with U.S. Bank. I am a small business banker. U.S. Bank does a variety of things for small businesses, even more things than you probably realize. But we are a full-service bank. We are located in various spots throughout the state. We've been a partner with GROW Nebraska for a long time now, and it's really been beneficial for both parties, I think. But we offer services anywhere from credit cards to merchant to checking accounts to loans, small business, large business, SBA. We even most recently, I'm actually going out on a call right after this call to talk about our new payment point of sale system, which is called Talic. It's just brand new. We just rolled out. It's all done on iPads and wireless and really neat and clean and really user friendly. So we're a full service bank. If anybody has any questions, please contact me. You can get my contact information through Heidi. But if you have any banking question, any banking needs at all, we'd love to help.
Yes, and I'll be sending out your contact information then in an email after the call, so everyone can watch for that.
Perfect.
Thank you, Jay. So, and thanks to U.S. Bank for sponsoring this month. Definitely a topic that we can all learn about. So, Laura, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away from here.
Thank you. So my name is Laura Ladehoff, and I am actually going to talk a little bit about my position here with U.S. Bank, and then a little bit of history with myself and how I got this role within the bank. And then we'll go into the most important topic, which is fraud regarding small business. And then at the end, I'm going to touch a little bit about personal fraud that can happen on your personal accounts. So because U.S. Bank is such a large bank, we have numerous fraud departments, and each department handles different types of fraud. So another department within U.S. Bank called Information Security Services, or we call it ISS, they handle the cybercrime and cybersecurity cases, such as the Heartbleed, along with many other types of cyber fraud. So unfortunately, I don't handle that type of fraud, and so any questions pertaining to that would be directed towards your relationship manager or your banker. So I'm just going to touch on what I handle today. So I am a senior investigator with U.S. Bank Corporate Security, and although my division is under a large umbrella, it's called Enterprise Security Services, we're not actually security. We're actually the law enforcement wing and the highest investigative authority within the U.S. Bank core footprint. So as it was described to me when I first started my position, my role is similar to that of law enforcement just for the bank. So I handle all financial crime cases similar to that of law enforcement for U.S. Bank. I work closely with all types of law enforcement, including local police departments, county sheriff's offices, county attorney offices, U.S. Marshals, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Homeland Security, and the Office of the Inspector General. And I'm working with them to apprehend the suspects that commit the financial fraud against U.S. Bank and its customers. So I'm also the person to respond to robberies and fraud in progress situations, and my cases have been featured on the local news and Crime Stoppers locally. So I've been with U.S. Bank a total of 10 years. Prior to that, I was in law enforcement for 4 years. I've worked my way up within banking from teller when I started college. Then I was a banker within the branch, an assistant manager, and now I'm a senior investigator. So I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Midland Lutheran College there in Fremont, Nebraska. My degree is actually in sociology with a minor in criminal justice. So my office is local, and I'm actually here in Omaha. I'm in the large Woodman building, but I am an investigator for the whole Midwest region, meaning I cover a total of 7 states. So my assigned area is all of Nebraska and western Iowa. I do go on call about every month and a half, and while I'm on call, I handle cases under the entire Midwest region footprint. So my job is to recover any money that U.S. Bank has lost due to fraud and financial crimes and report any risk associated to it. So I am going to mention some actual cases that I have covered, and any cases that are mentioned today are real, and the individual or business names are associated, and any identifying details have been left out for confidentiality reasons. So I do want to make this, I guess, so you can ask questions as you want. I will have time at the end while I ask if you have any questions also. But if you have any questions or comments during my presentation, feel free to ask. So just a couple statistics before I get started. It's reported that 60% of businesses were affected by fraud in 2013. And the average amount lost by business due to fraud is $23,100 per instance. I found an interesting quote while I was getting prepared for the presentation, and it was a quote by Richard Oliver, which is part of the Federal Reserve Bank. And it was in May of 2011 he stated this, but he said, while the exciting and glamorous fraud topics today include wire fraud, account takeovers, identity theft, and scamming, the results of the Association for Financial Professionals Annual Corporate Fraud Survey reminds us that the most vulnerable instrument available today is paper checks. So although on the news we see many instances of wire fraud or internal fraud, the paper check is the actual #1 device used for fraud. So I'm going to go over many instances of check fraud then. Check forgery, there's 2 most common methods of check forgery. And the #1 is the forged maker, which is when the customer reports to the bank that his or her signature has been forged. So the suspect's actually able to do this because he has knowledge of the customer's signature. So maybe it's someone known to the victim, or maybe it's a family member. The suspect sometimes scribbles the signature, making it unreadable. Or the suspect can use a fake identification, or if the merchant fails to verify the identification. An example of this is an insurance case where the insurance company has 7 checks with the correct insurance claim numbers, and they were all forged and cashed by one suspect with an agent's signature. This particular company had an alert on the account to contact them for any check cashed over $500. It's believed that the suspect in this case was actually someone who worked for the insurance company because they had knowledge of that alert on the account. Each of the 7 fraud checks was just under $500. Thus, the suspect somehow having knowledge of the alert. So the total risk to the company was almost $3,500. The next most common type of check forgery are forged endorsement checks, and that's where a customer writes a check, but the recipient never receives it due to the suspect stealing the check from a mailbox, going through the victim's trash, stealing the check from the victim, maybe stealing the purse, stealing the victim's vehicle, and maybe the check was inside. So in these situations, the suspect can use a fake ID, maybe making a fake ID to make themselves the name and their picture with that the victim's name. Suspect washing the check and adding their name in the payee line, and the suspect can alter the payee name to match his or her name. So an example of this is I had an employee's personal garage and vehicle was broken into. The employee had a reimbursement check from their employer in their purse that was in the vehicle that was broken into. So not only was the business check compromised, but also the account number and signature was compromised on the check. The suspect had counterfeit business checks made. In this case, there were 2 suspects working together, a male and a female, that cashed 6 checks in 2 days, totaling almost $6,000. So when fraud happens, they work really quickly because they know they're going to get caught eventually. So it's quickly and in large amounts in numerous locations normally. So this example leads me to the next type of check fraud, which is counterfeit checks. The three primary counterfeit checks used by both suspects and victims are personal checks, business checks, and cashier's checks or official checks. Counterfeit business checks are used by organized fraud rings in online scams such as Craigslist, eBay, and secret shopper scams. An example of this, a case that I had, is an individual that sold their vehicle on Craigslist for $16,000. This individual received two counterfeit business checks for $8,000 each. The individual didn't know that the two checks were counterfeit checks, and they deposited the checks into the personal account. Both checks came back fraudulent, and luckily the checks came back soon enough before the exchange of the vehicle occurred. So in this situation, the individual paid off their debt, additional debt that they had, right after he deposited the fraudulent checks. So the money was owed back to the bank. As part of the restitution agreement, the individual actually gave the vehicle that he was trying to sell to the bank, and the bank used that as part of the restitution agreement. So that's something else that I do within the bank, is I handle any kind of restitution agreements or kind of money that the suspects are trying to pay back to the bank.
This is Dan Hilger. I just came on.
Oh, okay. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
So going along with the counterfeit checks, both personal and business checks can be ordered by a variety of check printing companies, which makes the risk of counterfeit check fraud much higher. An example of this, it was just a small business here locally. It was a bakery, small bakery, that had 6 counterfeit checks that attempted to be cashed against the business account. The counterfeit checks looked similar to his actual payroll checks, but had a different address in an entirely different state. So this bakery was actually in Nebraska, and the address was in California. The suspect went as far as to producing a fraudulent website with the fraudulent address listed. The entire risk amount for the 6 counterfeit checks was almost $5,000. In this example, actually, it was caught prior to the checks going through the account, and that was because there was a check filter on this type of account. So any kind of check filters or fraud devices that you're interested in placing on your account, I would just recommend talking to your banker or talking to Jay, as he mentioned earlier, as that's something that he would set up with you. The next type of check fraud that I handle is altered checks. So an altered check is a modified check. So it's similar to washing a check to change the information, such as the amount or the payee. So the altered information can be changed, such as the customer information, and it can include adding additional names to the payee, altering the amount, typically much higher than the original amount. The routing number, the account number, is modified. The date is washed or altered or scribbled and making it hard to read. So maybe it was a check that was issued 2 years ago and it may have been a bad check, but the suspect may try to run it through the bank by altering the date. Or the payee name is altered to the name of the suspect. So an example of this is an individual, actually an elderly customer, put a check in their mailbox to mail for a national organization for a donation. So she thought she was mailing $50 for a donation, and the check was stolen out of the mailbox and altered by washing it, and the information, including the payee and the amount, were changed. So the check was cashed by the suspect, and instead of the $50, it was cashed for $500. So that's just an example of an altered check. Another quote is, the most prevalent check fraud method in counterfeiting is altering the MICR line at the bottom of the check. This type of activity has occurred 62% of all businesses that suffered at least one check fraud in 2013. Altering checks, I've seen an increase in that recently. You hear, again, media covers it quite a bit, but checks being stolen from mailboxes, even, say apartment homes where they don't have a secured mail location, so maybe rent checks that are not in a lockbox, those being taken and altered in some way. So different ways to protect your business against check fraud. Ensure that the check stock is in a secure location. Maintain a check log. Keep a list of who has access to the check stock. Keep all signature stamps in a secure environment. Now, signature stamps are definitely, from a fraud perspective, something I definitely wouldn't recommend, but I know some businesses do have those in case someone is out or, too busy, not in the office that day to sign. Reconcile accounts regularly. Some businesses have gone to outsourcing their check file to do approval electronically. That's something that the banks are offering now that they'll actually, similar to that of bill pay on your personal accounts, but with businesses, they'll actually send your checks out for you. So if you feel your business has been a victim of check fraud, contact your banker or relationship manager or your business banker, such as Jay, immediately, and definitely file it with law enforcement. In 2013, 52% of businesses experienced check fraud in the past year. This was the payment method experienced the second highest level of fraud behind credit cards, which is 66%. Does anyone have any questions pertaining to check fraud before I move on to the next section? Okay, I'll go ahead and move on then. This next section is actually a pretty popular topic. It's wire fraud. I'm going to touch on a couple different ways I've seen wire fraud happening. The first one is the fraudulent email account. And so that would be when a suspect creates a fraudulent email account similar to the actual business email account. So say my email account was laura.ladehoff@usbank.com. The suspect may create a fraudulent email account with laura.ladehoff1@usbank.com. So some kind of email account that's very similar, so the victim wouldn't recognize the difference. So important to do so you don't fall a victim of that is ensure dual control, having 2 approvers for any kind of wire transfers, initiate a second confirmation process. Example is to call and verify the person over the phone or in person. So rather than just sending a wire transfer out per a request via email, maybe calling the phone number that you have on file for that customer and verifying that over the phone. And then also to type a new email, email rather than just replying to the email. So just rather than replying to me saying, yes, I sent the wire transfer, actually typing a new email out with the email address you have on file for the customer. Why I think wire fraud is becoming so popular by the suspects is because wires happen so quickly and they happen for larger amounts than check or ACH fraud. Wires normally aren't a system issue, meaning it's not an issue within the bank. Normally the problem is in an internal process within the business. When the money is sent for a wire, it's very difficult to get that money back, and that's why it's so important that you notify the bank right at the beginning if you believe a wire was sent that you sent was fraudulent. An example of this, or a case that I worked, was a vendor's email was hacked. Fraudulent emails were sent to numerous businesses. Another business employer responded to the email, and the suspect and business employee emailed back and forth and began to build a relationship. Information is exchanged, such as balances and accounts, and the suspect vendor then requests a fraudulent wire be sent. The employee complies and sends a wire for over $533,000 to an unknown beneficiary and bank. Looking back at the emails, as I got the case, there were small differences in past email requests by the actual business owner, such as grammar and punctuation errors by the suspect, and the wire request was out of the normal activity for the vendor. So the business is notified by the vendor about their email being hacked, and the risk and loss to the business was $533,000. In this case, they didn't find out about it being fraudulent. It actually, I believe, was 2 weeks after the wire was sent. Phishing email is another common wire fraud scheme, and that would be an example of how individuals are lured by phone, call, or letter. So they attempt to gather information on an account by impersonation. So it's important to update your passwords frequently and choose passwords that can't easily be guessed, and verify that it's a known email address that you're getting the wire request from. Any questions regarding wire fraud at all?
Laura, I'll echo something they said. This is Jay Rose again. But we had a customer on our floor that had a very similar case to what you just said. But what became apparent was the fraudster had seen the email correlation, so they had read actual emails back and forth. So they had somehow hacked into the system, gotten a hold of actual emails, and then when they crafted their fraudulent email, it was so similar to what had been the normal correspondence. The cadence was the same and everything was the same. It was just not verified within that internal company. And then, the authorized person is the one who called the bank. So the bank, even though we have lots of additional steps to prevent fraud, the customers internally don't. And that was, I think they ended up losing $17,000 or something along those lines, sending out a fraudulent wire just because they got an email to do it. And then in another case like that, I think it was actually internal within the company. So it was like the president was sending an email to the bookkeeper saying to send the wire to this particular business and account, and that whole thing was fraudulent. But they had seen the internal emails between the company, and they knew how to make it look legitimate. And it's just crazy how you really, if you're doing anything by email, you need to be very vigilant.
It is. I agree with you, Jay. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of cases like this and a lot of money lost. That's why I believe that second confirmation process is so important. I know from within U.S. Bank branches, any wires sent, it's rare that email wires are sent from within branches because that has to be manager approved. But if it is done, there's actually, you need two different ways to verify a customer. So whether it be over the phone, asking different identifying questions that we have. So that part is so important. And, of course, we try to make it easier as a bank, giving that business access to sending their own wires, because maybe it's a business that sends a lot of wires, and so, they can't come into the bank every day to send a wire. But it's important that the business, follows different steps so they don't, have risk or loss to their company too. So thank you, Jay. Any other questions or comments regarding wire fraud? Okay, so I'm going to go over a couple of ways on how to stop losses at your business due to fraud. So what can you do as a business owner or even personally to prevent fraud? Know your employees. I say that because there's a lot of internal fraud, which I'm going to cover. Know your customers and know your vendors. Use dual control or dual signatures. Keep checks, money on a need-to-access basis and log. Keep check stock, credit cards, and cash in a secure location. Verify identity. That's just going back to what I just mentioned, but ask for additional identifiers and trust your gut instinct. If it just doesn't seem right, or if it just feels out of the ordinary for your customer, maybe to get someone who doesn't normally work with that customer or vendor, some other kind of approval process rather than just sending the request out. Review the account history. Are there any kind of pattern changes? Coordinate a review team within your business for fraud, and report all instances of fraud to your bank, banker, and law enforcement. Internal fraud, which I mentioned I was going to cover. There's many types of internal fraud, so I'll cover a few of them. One of them is account takeover, and that's when an employee uses customer information for personal gain, or an employee can sell or give information to others. An example of this is an employee who had left a business a year prior begins using a customer's account information gained from working at that business to pay for her personal credit card. The total amount lost because it was reconciled frequently was just under $500. Embezzlement's another type of internal fraud that's common, which would be theft of money or currency. So the act is committed by an employee either by physical removal, conspiracy to commit, or electronically. An example of this, or a case I had, was a 15-year employee that had access to all the controls of the business and had a gambling problem. The employee ends up embezzling almost $200,000 before the business realized it. So this was a good example as to why to have dual approvers, dual initiators, dual signers, and not just one employee having the sole access to the business's funds. Another type of internal fraud is theft. So it may not be money, but theft of actually taking any assets or fixtures of value owned by your company without proper consent. Any comments or questions regarding internal fraud before I move on? Internal fraud, at least I notice it a lot on the news or the media. It's being covered a lot. I think it's being caught a lot more frequently. Of course, you want to trust your employees and you hire the right people, and a lot of times, you may have a relationship outside of work with your employees, or whether it be a family member, but just always have a way to have a barrier or a way to protect your money, your business assets. So I mentioned this earlier. I didn't want to just discuss how to protect your business, but I also wanted to discuss how to protect yourself against fraud. I handle both business and personal fraud cases. So check fraud cases are actually, check card fraud is a large number of cases I have. So that could be when a check card is lost, stolen, or misplaced. I work closely with law enforcement on numerous check card fraud cases daily, and I help gain video footage as I have access to all the cameras at the branches or ATMs, images, location, time, date of the fraud, and I send video to law enforcement regarding those cases. A common occurrence with check card fraud recently is something called the felony lane gang, or we call it the FLG. Has anyone heard of that recently, on the news or anything like that? This type of fraud actually, it originated in Florida, and that's actually where the suspects come from. They kind of recruit, it's usually female suspects that are recruited, and they then go to different locations, whether it be school parking lots, park parking lots, of course, not a park this time of year, but movie theater parking lots, maybe where vehicles are left unattended or unlocked, and they steal purses so they can get any kind of cash in there, but they're really interested in the ID information and check card information, and if there's any kind of checks in the purses. And then the felony lane gang, they use the drive-up lanes at the branches rather than going into the branches. The female suspects disguise themselves by wearing wigs or wearing sunglasses, any way to disguise themselves, and then they do withdrawals from the victim's accounts. And then they usually get some kind of proceeds from the fraud, and then they also give some of the proceeds to the people who recruited them, which are the suspects from the Florida area. So this type of fraud, even though it sounds like a big, ring of suspects, actually is occurring here in Nebraska. I've had quite a few cases here in Omaha. I've heard of a few in Lincoln, and so I just want people to know that it is happening here in this area. Check card skimming is another type of check card fraud, and skimming, it's when check card information is captured by a skimming device and it's being used in another state or country. And check card information was obtained via some form of spyware on an internet website or a personal computer. So skimming devices can be placed on ATMs. I know many of us use outside gas station pumps, and it's used to gather information from the magnetic strip to make duplicate cards or skimming devices to defraud the account of the victim. So there's many types of skimming devices, such as an overlay over the keypad at an ATM, a camera placed above the keypad to video the input of the PIN numbers. There's an in-slot magnetic strip skimmer, U.S. bank branches review their ATMs on site. This is just an example, at least 2 times a day to make sure their ATMs don't have skimming devices. And U.S. Bank also has a team in place to respond to any skimming device page if found at a branch at an ATM. So I also handle the skimming cases within the bank. So again, if your check card is lost or stolen, report it immediately to your banker, and they'll assist you with filling out any kind of fraud paperwork. If you notice any kind of fraudulent transactions that are taken from your account due to the report, report it to any kind of law enforcement. Check card and credit card fraud resulted in losses amounting to $11.27 billion during 2012. Another type of fraud that's happening a lot and is covered a lot by the media is online scams. And I know we all have heard of online scams and we think who could actually fall a victim. We've heard it all, but unfortunately I get online scams, I would say almost daily. One type of online scam is a grandparent scam. And this type of scam can happen online. It also can happen via phone. So an example would be an elderly customer that comes into the bank and attempts to do a large Western Union to a foreign country, stating they received a phone call from their grandson who is in need of medical attention, and that's the reason for the request. Well, hopefully, we talk about this quite a bit at U.S. bank branches, but hopefully the bank branch would realize that this person is a victim of a scam, and they pull the customer over and talk to them regarding the situation, and usually a call is placed to the grandson, and the grandson is in the United States and they're fine. So that's a common scam out there. The auto auction scam, which I mentioned also earlier regarding selling of vehicles online, whether it be Craigslist or eBay, and then receiving either counterfeit checks or being asked to give the vehicle over and they are somehow scammed within the money. Secret shopper scam. This scam's been around a long time, and I remember hearing about it many years ago, but it still happens. So a victim receives a letter via mail requesting them to be a secret shopper. The letters are usually accompanied by a fraudulent business check that is requested to be deposited into your personal account, along with surveys to be completed. So with the funds from the check, the victim is instructed to purchase prepaid cards while surveying the business. The remaining amount is for the victim to keep as income. So usually a quick time frame to be completed so the suspect gets their money before the check comes back as fraudulent. So in one case I had the victim mailed the prepaid cards along with the surveys after they called the phone number and gave the authorization numbers on the prepaid cards to the suspect. Of course, they didn't know it was a suspect, but the address ended up being fraudulent and the cards and surveys were returned back to the victim. So when the victim went to see if the money was still on the prepaid cards that they got back, the money was already gone. And the check deposited was fraudulent and the victim owed the bank the money. Another scam, investment scam, that's a common online scam. An example of this, there was a case where an elderly widowed farmer, he began withdrawing all of his money from investments, retirement, insurance, and depositing it into his personal account. He then began withdrawing cash, requesting a check card that he had never had before, and began mailing the actual cash to the suspect in Jamaica along with his debit card. So as I reviewed the account, I saw there was many ATM withdrawals that began appearing on the customer's account from Jamaica while the customer was at home. So the customer was at his home in Nebraska, and there were numerous times a day ATM withdrawals that were happening in Jamaica. So the total amount involved in this case was over $100,000 lost by the victim. Lottery scam is another online scam, and also the Lonely Heart scam. And this one I honestly get calls on, I think, daily. The suspects and victims meet on a dating site, whether it be Match.com. There's many dating sites out there. They start a relationship, and after a few months, the suspect begins asking for money. The suspect is normally overseas and is requesting to meet the victim. The suspect then mails the victim a fraudulent business check to deposit into his or her personal account. The victim is then instructed by the suspect to withdraw the money and purchase prepaid cards. The victim gives the suspect the prepaid card information such as the authorization numbers and the card numbers. The check then comes back as fraudulent, and the victim then owes the bank the money. So the money is gone by the suspect without them even receiving the cards. This one, like I said, I get so often, and
Did we lose her?
I don't know.
Laura, are you still there? Oh, we might have lost her.
I'll send her a message here. I got kicked off earlier, I think.
Oh, goodness.
So hold on.
Has anybody else been having issues with that?
I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the bank's phones.
Well, let's see if we can have her call back in.
She's calling back in.
Perfect. Sorry about that, everyone.
Did we get Laura back here?
Laura Ladehoff.
Hey, Laura. So, sorry about that. So, glad to have you back.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure where I lost you guys, and I don't know what happened, so I apologize for that.
I believe you were talking about the online dating scams.
Okay. So, that's actually where I just asked if there was any questions regarding or comments regarding the online scams at all. There's quite a few of them out there. I don't know if any of you personally or know anyone that has been a victim of any kind of online scams.
So you were talking about the Nebraskan who with the Jamaica connection.
Mm-hmm.
So was the Nebraska person doing anything, or had somebody just hacked into their account and was doing things?
They had met this person online, and the Jamaican person had told them that it was a new type of investment out there, and told him, what to do, prompted him to do withdrawals. And amazingly, I've heard of it more than just this one case, but people are actually withdrawing cash and mailing that to other countries as part of scams. They just mail it like UPS mail or FedEx, and mailing actual cash in the mail, and mailing actual debit cards to them.
Okay.
So it is a newer type of fraud out there. I think I've seen it within the last 6 months. But I've seen more than one case, unfortunately. And it's usually with elderly victims.
What was the story in that case? Like, what prompted him to send the money?
Well, as I mentioned, he had money in retirement and money in 401ks, and he just wanted a new way to invest his money kind of thing. And so usually the scam artist has some elaborate story to lure him in. And so in that case, it was some kind of Jamaican scam, but he was guaranteed to make millions doing this, but unfortunately lost the money.
Do you have recommendations for, say, some of our business owners get requests for large orders, things like that, and they're sent checks sent via email?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggestions for how to verify whether those are legitimate or not?
That the checks are legitimate?
Well, the requests are legitimate before they start shipping product and find out that the check is not valid. Or
I guess the number one way I'd recommend is to call the number they have on file for their customer, and then verify them that way. Is it people who don't have any kind of customer relationship built up, and it's just something like a new order type of thing, or?
Often, yes.
Okay.
So some of them are international. Some of them, even have fake websites set up to make it look like they're legitimate, things of that nature.
That's a great question. Before shipping the product out, I guess to ask questions pertaining to the customer to make sure that it is an actual customer, that they are wanting the product. Sometimes you can actually call, like if they're getting checks in the mail, they can actually call the bank and verify the funds on the check, or even to see if the account is an actual account. That can help in that situation. Or just having some kind of barriers or blocks on their account, their business account. So talking to their business banker for any kind of fraud accounts or fraud blocks or fraud alerts.
So in the old days, we used to call in to a bank and say, we've received a check from such and such, and here's the number, and I have a check for $5,000. Will that check clear? And they used to be able to tell us that. Do they still provide a service like that?
Sometimes. You mean if you're calling other banks or if you're calling your own bank?
If you have a check that you receive from a customer or something, and you call the bank where this check is drawn on and ask them if the check will clear, will the bank still be able to tell you that? So then you would know if it was a legitimate check or not?
Yes. Some banks still do that. Some do not. Some have an automated system, so they'll give you a different number to verify the check. But a lot of the larger banks are moving away from that. But some do. So I would say definitely try it. Try to call to verify it.
I can add to this. We had a customer that this very thing happened to. In that case, the check was good, so it wouldn't have mattered if they called in. It was a check where they had stolen a legitimate company's check, and there was enough funds in the account to cover the check, but it wasn't till that, or that particular customer at the other bank had systems set up on their software so that when the check tried to go through, it's still rejected. So sometimes you can be caught by that. What that company ended up doing is they set up a company policy that said if they're dealing with a brand new customer, they will not ship any product, I think, for like 14 days after receipt of the check, or they would require a wire transfer for their very first payment before they started doing business with them. So those are just a couple other things we came up with for that particular customer. And that customer was even a little bit stranger because it was the way that the fraudster got them was they wanted to order the product from your customer, and they said, we'll send you a check. So they sent them a check, and they didn't actually want the product. What they did is said, oh, well, can you use this shipping company to ship the items? And they sent the check for enough, way over the dollar amount of the purchase and the shipping, but they wanted them to use the specific shipping company. So then our customer ended up wiring money to the shipping company to come pick up the product. They were getting the product ready to go, and that company didn't exist. And a simple Google search would have showed them that shipping company didn't exist, but they didn't jump through that one extra step and end up losing the shipping cost. They didn't actually send the product, so at least they saved that. But, there's all sorts of crazy stuff.
That's a great idea because getting some kind of guaranteed funds, and even there's so many types of counterfeit cashier checks out there, lately, that a wire transfer is a great idea to get some kind of guaranteed funds prior to shipping anything out.
So are customers okay with that? Just telling them, for the first few purchases, we're going to make sure the check clears, and then once you've built up your reputation, you'll be able to charge more in the future? Are customers okay with that?
Well, this particular customer was, but they got burned, so then they realized the benefit of taking a little caution, because you get so excited when you make a new sale, especially a big sale, in a company that's growing or a smaller business, that you don't, you want it to be true, and if it seems too good to be true, a lot of times it is. So in this particular case, they're going to be more cautious in the future, which is, I think if it's a legitimate customer that's ordering from you, if you maybe even explain why you have that policy, I don't think they've had any trouble. But I don't think they get a lot of new customers either. So the newer customers are, not above taking that extra precaution.
Yeah, usually the extra precautions are worth it in the end. I would say the people who usually make a fuss about extra precautions, or even the people that make a fuss about extra identifiers, are the ones that are usually committing fraud. So I would say if it's legitimate, I don't think that they would normally have a problem with that. Because as business owners, you just want to make sure you're getting, actual funds before you're shipping out, your products. So,
do you have recommendations for, say, if they get the payment via credit card, but it's a stolen credit card?
Recommendations. Oh yeah, that was one of the questions I had. That one, normally the credit cards are some kind of backed by Visa or whatever it may be, the MasterCard. So you'd want to go through the software provider or the bank on that one. So do you mean like you got a stolen credit card and you shipped product out to them? Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, there usually is some way to be able to get that back. Regarding like filing the fraud claim within the credit card or within your bank. But I know that the credit card companies have extra barriers for the fraud. So I know that's not a very good answer, but unfortunately I'm not on that side of it. Also, maybe even your merchant services rep, which would be the software provider, might be a good question for them.
Perfect.
Yeah, and as Laura was saying, a credit card is not considered a guaranteed payment form, because you can, even legitimate cards, you can call your credit card company and said somebody else made that purchase, and they'll take it right back from you. So you'd still be another case where you could say credit card payment or check payments, we're still going to wait if you're a brand new customer. Credit cards, I don't think you have to wait as long, but you're still going to have a grace period until we're sure that those funds are collected before we'll send the product. Or for that first order, have them send an actual wire just to be, 100% safe. If it's a big order, if it's a small order, if it's a smaller business, sometimes that's just the risk you take doing business. But, that's another form that they can get you with.
Another question that was submitted prior to the call was, are most of the check frauds you see ones where perpetrators forge signatures, or where perpetrators forge endorsements, or where perpetrators alter payees? I see all types of fraud like that. So I would say it's about equal. I don't say it's one over the other. Like I said, the altering the payee has been common here lately, but I've also done a lot of forged endorsement fraud here lately. So honestly, I would say I'm getting about equal. Once a suspect realizes he or she is getting away with some type of fraud, they'll just continue to do it until they realize it's being stopped in some way. So if they're pretty good at altering the payee, they're going to continue to do it that way. And they also tell their suspect or their friends that do the same type of fraud, and they tell them how to do it, and then additional fraud is happening. So any other questions or comments?
Isn't it true that people can learn how to like chemically wash checks by just searching things on the internet? And is washing checks becoming more of a problem, or it's just always kind of been there?
I think it's always been there, and unfortunately, it's not going away. Because I thought coming into this position, I thought, I'm not going to see that anymore. Who really does that? And I see it. I see, and honestly, a lot of the checks, when I look at them, I'm like, I can't believe it was even accepted somewhere. I can't believe that someone didn't catch it, because some of them are pretty good, but other ones are just like, they didn't do a good job, or you can just really tell something's wrong with the check. But just taking the time to really look over the item that you're accepting and making sure it looks correct, because a lot of the fraudulent like the counterfeit checks that I get, they just look odd in some way. Maybe the font's different in one area than another area. Maybe there's incorrect spelling somewhere. I've even seen where a state, an address is misspelled. So, normally a business looks over that information prior to ordering checks, and they wouldn't order a check that way. So, just really looking over the instrument that you're accepting.
Aren't they going to change the credit cards in the United States here, coming up more like Europe does without the magnetic strip and moving to something else? Is that true? Yeah,
I've heard that with the chip. I've heard that, but unfortunately the fraudsters or the suspects they're so smart and so good at what they're doing that I wonder what they're going to come up with next, because if they're coming up with a new way to possibly stop fraud, usually then maybe give it a little bit of time, but then people are realizing how to get around it. So we'll see, but I do hear that that's coming. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much for having me on the call. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. And for everybody who's here, we will be sending out a recording of this call. So if you want to go back and re-listen, if there's something you weren't quite clear on and you want to review it, you will have that recording. I will be sending that out later this afternoon along with a survey, so you can tell us what you thought, if you have any suggestions for future trainings. And if you are interested, our next Third Thursday training is going to be John Heaston from Pioneer Media, and he is going to be talking about Google and Google tools for your business. So I want to say thank you again, Laura. Thank you, Jay. Thanks to U.S. Bank for helping us out with this. And thanks to all of you for attending today.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.